Okay, so welcome to the Training and Job Opportunities session. And I'm replacing Jake Linklater, who had to fly back to Toronto at the last minute. And so I'm going to introduce Lorraine White. She's the Chief Compliance Officer at Seven Leaf Cannabis, which is so far the very first Health Canada licensed production facility on First Nation land. And Lorraine, besides being the Chief Compliance Officer, Lorraine was also the youngest ever female elected to serve as Chief of the St. Regis Mohawk Tribe. And we also have another Mohawk on our panel, David Sharp from the Bay of Quinte, Tyendinaga, which has quite a few dispensaries. And so David is the CEO responsible for the strategic direction of Bridging Finance. And that's the name of the company, Bridging Finance. David has 25 years of financial services industry experience in roles such as General Counsel, Chief Compliance Officer, and Chief Risk Officer for leading financial organizations, and previously was the head of investigations for the Mutual Fund Dealers Association of Canada. And as I said before, David is from Tyendinaga, and he's a member of the Law Society of Upper Canada since 1997. And in 2015, David was named to the Diversity 50 in Canada. And our third panelist is Mohan Donetto. I don't have to turn the page to see that. Mohan is the Director General of Economic and Business Opportunities at Indigenous and Northern Affairs Canada. Mohan is obviously a government executive leading diverse teams to promote economic development in partnership with Indigenous peoples, the private sector, and other levels of government. He's led government programs related to mining, environmental assessment, environmental remediation, international, intergovernmental, and Indigenous issues. He's negotiated international regulatory cooperation with the United States and Mexico. So maybe he can help us get exporting to the US and Mexico as well. So without further ado, I'll ask Lorraine to come up and say a few words about this groundbreaking company that you've established.
Thank you. Segwego. Greetings to all of you, and Nyawatgoa to the Tutina Nation, as well as the organizers of this, for hosting this incredible gathering and this important event. These are exciting but confusing times, and we sincerely hope and believe that this conference represents the first of many significant platforms for First Nations as we continue to define our growing presence in leadership roles in the cannabis and hemp industries. From a business perspective, there is no doubt that the Canadian cannabis market is still in its infancy with tremendous growth potential. Financial projections estimate that it will become a multi-billion-dollar industry within the next 5 years, creating more than 150,000 jobs and opening up new fields of study for universities and researchers across the nation. Additionally, even beyond cannabis specifically, other related areas of growth and expansion include the development of solar power, irrigation technology, engineering and construction methods, security resources and equipment, as well as delivery services, et cetera, et cetera. The list goes on and on. In short, it would not be a leap to say that cannabis is here to stay. As Canada's first Indigenous owned and operated licensed producer on territory, Seven Leaf is now also part of the fastest growing segment of the North American economy. It is our hope to offer opportunity and success, not only in our home community of Akwesasne, but also to form strategic partnerships and alliances throughout Indian country and to share our experience in expanding expertise with other First Nations. Now, let's talk about Seven Leaf. Or not. Clicker here. This one here? Got it. Thank you. Who are we? As mentioned, Seven Leaf has the distinct honor of being the first First Nations owned and operated licensed producer to be located on reserve, and specifically on the Akwesasne Mohawk territory. Our executive team is entirely comprised of Akwesas Lono, as is the vast majority of our employees. We are all Mohawk Nation members whose roots run deeply in the Akwesasne community. This is our home, and as such, we are invested in our land, our people, our collective prosperity, and the future of our children. These are the commitments of our founding partners, as well as our employees, and because of who we are and what we seek to achieve, these are also the commitments of Seven Leaf as a company. Now, you heard a little bit about myself in the introduction, but I would also like to introduce to you, by way of the big screen, our president, Louis Mitchell. Louis is a local businessman and the former chief of police for the territory of Akwesasne. In addition to myself and Louis, other members of our executive team bring expertise in the areas of business ownership and management, finance, construction, and horticulture. Although Seven Leaf began as an idea and a conversation in 2013, we didn't begin our professional journey until 2014, when we first submitted our application to Health Canada to grow and sell medicinal marijuana. Since that time, we have undergone and completed many application stages, including the passing of stringent security screenings of key executives and personnel, as well as the successful submission of our business plan, which included the repurposing of a former water bottling plant in Akwesasne. Fast forward almost 5 years, and after receiving our license this past September, I am proud to say that Seven Leaf will have our first plants growing in our facility in a matter of weeks, with the hope that we will have product available for retail sale in early 2019. Not too shabby for a group of motivated Mohawks with a big idea. Woo. Now, where are we? We are located in Akwesasne, which is home to a strong, vibrant, and proud Kanien'kehá:ka, or Mohawk community. We are geographically unique with not only the US-Canadian border bisecting and running through our territory, but also the borders of Quebec and Ontario on the northern portion or Canadian side of Akwesasne, and New York State on the southern. Within the so-called Canadian side of Akwesasne, there are 3 distinct districts, which include Kawanauga, which is Cornwall Island, Ontario, Ganadago, which is St. Regis, Quebec, and Gisnaigne, which is Snai, Quebec. The remaining portion is located in New York State. Seven Leaf is located on Kawanauga, Cornwall Island. In addition to the above, we also have several local governmental bodies, including the Mohawk Council of Akwesasne, which governs the north, and the federally recognized St. Regis Mohawk Tribe, which governs the south. These 2 governments are in addition to our traditional councils. Although our lands may be complicated, our identity is not. We are one people and we are one community. Our path, why not us? As I mentioned earlier, our story first began in 2013 as a conversation between friends and colleagues, and specifically about the developments in Ottawa related to medical cannabis. We could see that the laws and the landscape were changing, and that a new licensing system for growing medical cannabis was also going to mark the beginning of a new business era and a brand new industry. Perhaps most significantly for us was the recognition early on that this was an opportunity that was going to happen in the world around us, in our front yards, in the communities outside of Akwesasne, and it was going to happen with or without our participation. It was at that moment that we asked ourselves, why not us? Our very first steps included beginning the education process with our council and our community. And we did this even before we submitted our application. This was a significant and critical step in our journey. We knew that we had to begin the conversation with our people regarding cannabis. And more importantly, we needed to educate and remove, as much as possible, the stigma that continues to surround this amazing plant. Of course, many of our people, especially our elders, were very cautious and some even dismissive in the beginning. Some remain dismissive today, but that is okay, and we respect their personal opinions. However, after extensive outreach efforts over the years, including door-to-door visits, family meetings, community information sessions, numerous visits and tours of our facility with local groups, including our elders, our local youth council, as well as our leadership, we sincerely believe that our community has a much better understanding of medicinal cannabis and the very real benefits that it can provide. This belief is further supported by the results of a recent survey that our council put out regarding cannabis. The results were overwhelmingly in favor of allowing cannabis in our community, but of course, with the understanding and directive that it must be regulated and it must be safe. Seven Leaf has been incredibly fortunate to have enjoyed a very good and open working relationship with all of our councils. I say all because over the course of the past 5 years and throughout our entire application process, we have had the privilege and opportunity to work with not one, but 3 separate councils. In fact, several of our chiefs are in attendance today, and I would like to thank them for being here and for representing our community and attending this conference and gaining the knowledge and sharing the knowledge and expertise of so many. Seven Leaf continues to host leadership and councils from other First Nations and invite them to come and tour our facility and to meet with us to discuss potential partnerships and alliances. Today, I cordially extend the invitation to all of you as well. Seven Leaf facility. The Seven Leaf facility, and specifically Building A, consists of approximately 84,000 square feet with just about 30,000 square feet of canopy space. It is estimated that once we reach full growing capacity, we will produce in excess of 11 million grams per year. Construction of Building A has been divided into 4 phases, with the first phase completed and licensed. The remaining phases are expected to be completed within the next 12 months. In addition to Building A, we have expansion capability into Building B, which is located immediately behind our first facility and is twice the size of Building A. This expansion would result in 228,000 square feet of combined building space and over 100,000 square feet of canopy, which at full capacity in both buildings will produce and yield more than 39 million grams annually. Let's talk about the jobs. To date, and with construction underway, we have between 30 and 40 local people presently working on site. Once we have completed construction of Building A, or Phase 1, we expect that number to at least double. There is tremendous local interest in working with Seven Leaf and with our company. In fact, in April of this year, we held our very first job fair and attracted over 250 community members for 19 open positions. Our people want to work. They want good paying jobs in a fun and exciting working environment, and one that doesn't force them to travel, but allows them to stay in Akwesasne and go home to their families every night. That is the preeminent and true value of a project like this for us. Seven Leaf currently staffs positions and jobs in all areas of cannabis production, including administration, where we make sure that everyone knows what their job responsibilities are and that people get hired and paid. Quality assurance and compliance, where we make sure that we are producing the best possible product that we can in a safe and secure environment, and that all applicable rules and regulations are being followed. Operations. These include the physical running of the facility itself, including the areas where cannabis is present and made into products, and specifically plant oversight and cultivation. Construction. We are continuously adding to our construction crews as our needs and expansion plans grow. As mentioned, we hope to have Building A, or Phase 1, completed next year, and will immediately turn to the construction of Building B and Phase 2. When an employee joins Seven Leaf, we are not merely offering a job. We want to offer them a career, a lifetime of learning, growth, and advancement with us. One of the most exciting reasons for creating Seven Leaf is the fact that we can offer real futures for our young people and community members with long-term prospects and financial security. With our construction workers and Phase 1 hires in place, we are extremely proud to share that 98% of our employees are Mohawk and are from Akwesasne. Additionally, what is so incredible and is such a great source of pride for us is the fact that many of our young employees are college and university educated, with advanced degrees in biology and environmental science. It is an honor to provide these young people with fulfilling work and incomes that not only match their education, but allows them to remain home in Akwesasne with their families and with our community. While completing construction of the final phases of our building, and as our harvesting gets underway, we will add more and more people to our team. Everything from harvesting to quality control to packaging, sales, marketing, and delivery will expand and develop very quickly. We expect to have anywhere between 75 to 100 new jobs over the course of the next year, from growers to managers to construction and everything in between. Working at Seven Leaf. Why is Seven Leaf a great place to work? Certainly for our community members, we are leaders in the First Nations cannabis industry. It is a new and exciting industry. This is a young industry, so our young people are very enthusiastic about coming to work for us. We're located in Akwesasne with excellent benefits, competitive salaries, and opportunities for advancement. Additionally, a benefits overview has Seven Leaf offering a comprehensive benefits package designed to meet the needs of all of our people. When Seven Leaf is successful, our community and families prosper as well. There we go. Okay, training. Seven Leaf is on the cutting edge of this leading industry for the First Nations cannabis cultivation, for First Nations cannabis cultivation and production. In addition to training with various consultants to date, we have proactively researched and begun initial discussions with several colleges and universities regarding professional level training for our staff and our employees. We are committed to training our employees for success and so that they can become the experts in this new and exciting industry. Investment in people should be the priority for any business. It certainly is for us, with almost all of our staff originating from Akwesasne and our own community. It is our hope that through strategic partnerships with other First Nations that we may model and replicate what we have done in Akwesasne in their own communities. Our long-term vision includes utilizing Seven Leaf as the premier training ground for First Nation cannabis producers throughout Indian country, so that they too can take part in this new prosperity with long-term quality jobs and opportunities. Working with other First Nations. As we have made clear, our business model is to work in Indian country and with First Nations. Specifically, we are looking to form strategic partnerships and alliances which would promote an entire commerce chain between First Nations and which would link our Indigenous communities together from seed to sale. Of course, there will be challenges and hurdles thrown in front of us, whether they are political, legal, national, or local. They will be there, and that is okay, because we can overcome all of it if we stay true to our intentions and our commitment to work together on all of these issues. Nyawat Goa.
Thanks so much, Lorraine. I'm going to call up David Sharp right away, and we'll keep things rolling along.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. I'm David Sharp, the CEO of Bridging Finance, Inc. I think I have some slides here. Maybe Lorraine can show me how to work this. It's very rare that to let two Mohawks on a stage at one time, so this is a good moment. I really don't use slides anyhow, so I can just start. And we can go from there. That's not the right one, but that's all right. We are a finance firm based in Toronto, and as mentioned, I'm First Nations from Tyendinaga, and also mentioned that we do have a little bit of a dispensary proliferation in my community. Just a couple of stories I'll tell you about in how we're involved in First Nations financing and how it translated to cannabis, because I think it's important to understand the journey that we've been on, and to implore the First Nations folks out here and the communities to really grasp and tackle this opportunity of cannabis. What we say at Bridging Finance Inc. is that cannabis is the new buffalo from economic development for our communities. So at Bridging Finance, we're 32 people. It's Indigenous led. I am the CEO. We started in 2012. We're a $1.1 billion hedge fund. And in 2014, I decided as a First Nations person that we really were not meeting our obligations, and I wasn't meeting my obligation to First Nations. Like, why are we not doing deals, projects with First Nations? So I went to my employees and I said, we're going to start doing First Nations financing. We're going to start doing deals, economic development deals. There we go. Economic development deals with First Nations. Thank you. Which one do I press? Oh, got it, okay. So we're going to start doing projects, and that's what we did. So imagine if you went to a bunch of non-First Nations people on Bay Street in Toronto and said, we're going to do fisheries, we're going to do housing, we're going to do et cetera, renewable energy, and these are good deals. And all we had to do, as by way of example, is look at the Bank of Montreal. Bank of Montreal, and other banks too, but they're really the leader. They have a $2.5 billion lending book with First Nations. So in training my folks up in my company that I own, our mantra is First Nations business, Inuit business is great business, right? And so I'm telling you that because it leads us on this cannabis journey. And I'm just gonna flip around here a bit. And I just wanna show you an example of one of our deals, and I'll get there, or one of our projects. It's very difficult. There we go. So just an example of what we did in finance, First Nations finance, Elsipogtog First Nation in New Brunswick. I heard, and we always get invited in by communities. We don't go and try to sell First Nations anything. We get invited into the community. We heard that for the last 20 years, they wanted a grocery store in their community. And I was wondering, why can't they have a grocery store in their community? And I'm talking a superstore, like not like a little convenience store. So we got invited in by the chief and council and the elders. Said, come on, have a chat. And went and saw them, and we learned that members of the First Nation were traveling outside the First Nation. So monies were leaving the First Nations for groceries. Learned that single mothers would hop in taxis and go to the store off reserve to buy diapers and single diapers. And we said that something has to be done. So we said to the chief and council and elders that I'm coming back. I'm coming back with a check for $12 million the following week. And everyone looked at me like I was crazy, of course. And we did. And we built a grocery store. And think of Loblaws in Ontario or a superstore. And it equated to, and we're talking about jobs and training here, it equated to 60 jobs for the First Nation in training. It's a Loblaws franchise, and attached to it is a PharmaSafe. So that started us really on our journey with working with First Nations. As you can see up there, we were taken out, we were refinanced by the Bank of Montreal, and that's always a good thing for the First Nations because it's cheaper cost of capital. So since 2014, we've done $250 million in First Nations projects, and very proud of that, and $50 million in Inuit projects. So then we started thinking about cannabis. I wasn't a big fan, I have to admit. I wasn't a big fan of cannabis because I just didn't understand it. But I understood the opportunity for First Nations, and our partners, MRDIN, that's MJARDIN, they kept on inviting me to go down to Denver and visit with them, and I kept on refusing, saying we're busy doing other things. Finally, I went down to Denver, and I learned about this group called MRDIN. And certainly it's not a commercial for them, nor a commercial for Bridging Finance, but learned what they did for a living and how they had something called MRDIN University. And it's an online application. It's very robust to train First Nations and non-First Nations alike. At that time, it was non-First Nations, of course. My single question before we got involved in Canada, I had one question for this American group that had been in operation for 10 years, one of the best growers in North America, and that was key for me as well, because we need First Nations success in jobs and training. So growing successfully for 10 years, my one question to them, and quite simply was, sitting in a fancy boardroom in Denver, was, will you use cannabis for economic development for First Nations? And the answer, and think of the scenario, sitting around with a bunch of American people, most of them have not visited a First Nation or a tribe in the United States, and the answer right away was yes. We will use cannabis for our people, And we had a deal quite literally within an hour. And so we've marched on, and we have financed at Bridging these opportunities for First Nations. We're still open for business, and as I mentioned, we always have to be invited in. I'm not going to come to you and try to sell you anything. And when you look at our debt and the way we do deals, it's non-dilutive debt for MRDIN. So it's a very good scenario for them. And this is a corporation that went public last week on the Canadian Stock Exchange. I'm just going to give you, in a parting note here, a couple of case studies of what we've done. And I'll find it. Why don't I just give it to you now? Give you a couple of examples of First Nations that we're working with and worked with. The Mi'kmaq people of Nova Scotia. There's 13 First Nations in Nova Scotia. So we met with their assembly, and these things take time, as we all know. It was about over a course of a year that we're sitting down with the chiefs and their advisors. And we come to the point with them, and it's significant. There is a family in Nova Scotia, is one of the wealthiest developers in all of Nova Scotia, and they had built a production facility, state-of-the-art production facility just outside of Halifax. So in working with the First Nations, we came to an agreement, but then we approached the family and this beautiful, beautiful facility and said, can the First Nations buy the facility? And the deals that we like to do is we like to ensure the First Nation is majority owner. So this is not a royalty deal, this is ownership, training, jobs. So the family has agreed, and Bridging will finance this. So imagine that. I think only the second production facility in Nova Scotia that is going to be First Nations owned. For me, that's significant because when you look at that is job creation and it's wealth creation for the First Nation and all 13 First Nations. I'm told by the chiefs and the councillors that this is only the second time in the history of the Mi'kmaq that all 13 First Nations came together with an agreement for a project. The other one was solar. So very proud of that. But for us, when you look at cannabis, there's production, and Lorraine was mentioning seed to sale, there's also distribution. We want to, with our First Nations partners, control seed to sale and be vertically integrated. So in essence, create a consortium across Canada of First Nations-led and First Nations-owned production facilities and retail shops. So that's the opportunity for us. And I would say that we as people, time is of the essence. This industry will pass us, it will leave us behind. We got into it, and we've done $120 million now in cannabis since we got into it just over a year ago. And my preoccupation for our people is to ensure that we capture this moment, because industry, Bay Street, Wall Street, they're on it, and they're not going to look back. And I have to say, the speakers before this panel, Tilray and Canopy, I applaud them for saying they're open for business. I have to say, I want to see it. I want to see them support First Nations. This is our land. This is our territory. I want them to see them support First Nations, because we're there, and we should not be the only company in Canada that is using First Nations as the new buffalo, or using cannabis as a new buffalo for our First Nations. So that's the challenge. You know, open your doors for our communities, and we'll create jobs and we'll create opportunities. Now, my parting words are: I've been in Seven Leafs production facility a couple times. It is worth the visit. So take Lorena up on that invitation to go and have a look at Seven Leafs production facility. And I congratulate Seven Leaf and our friends there, our Mohawk friends. Thank you.
Mohan, could you please come up, and we will start as soon as we can to wrap things up.
Great. So I won't take too long. Very difficult presentations to follow. Thank you very much. So first of all, I'd definitely like to thank Tsuut'ina First Nation for welcoming me here today, and what an excellent facility. I'm just so impressed. I think I've done my fair share of contributions to the Tsuut'ina Housing Program. I plan to make more donations this evening next door. And also I'd like to acknowledge my fellow presenters. So I think you mentioned it. This is a lot about timing and opportunity. And the theme here was training and job opportunities. And I represent Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs. So typically, when you think of jobs and training, you think of Economic and Social Development Canada with the Big Assets program. Unfortunately, they couldn't be here. So I think I'll talk a bit more about something I know a bit more about, which is economic development and business development, which is more what my programs do. So across the country, employers are facing skills shortages in most sectors. At the same time, the Indigenous populations are the potential solution to these shortages. So this is an opportunity, it's not a problem. We know that the Indigenous population is younger than the Canadian average, and that the proportion of the population, of Indigenous population that is working age, is growing at a greater rate than the rest of the population, right? So huge opportunity there. Both community economic development corporations, Indigenous-owned companies like Seven Leaf, and the government and the mainstream private sector can provide opportunity for this population bulge that's coming through. And I think if we don't hit that opportunity, I think it'll be a huge wasted opportunity. So in 2011, there was an estimated 43,000 Indigenous-owned businesses across the country, according to the CCAB. That is huge. These businesses employ mostly Indigenous employees, more than 124,000 of them. So a medium-sized Canadian city worth of employment. Both communities and entrepreneurs are interested in training and job creation. So I have a list here of some of the programs that ESDC developed or delivers. I think most of you are familiar with that. So what I'll do is I'll focus a little bit on some of the work we've been doing with Indigenous Works, formerly known as the Aboriginal Human Resource Council, in addressing Call to Action 92, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's call to action to corporate Canada to engage with Indigenous peoples to close the socioeconomic gap. And I'll just let you in on a little bit of the work we're doing. I'll kind of breeze through things because I know we're running out of time a little bit. But I think it's important, and it's really, really encouraging to see so many cannabis industry leaders here today that are mainstream and Indigenous owned. I don't think you see that in too many sectors. And we'll take a look at some of the sectors in the presentation. So Indigenous Works did a survey of about 500 businesses and developed something called the Engagement Index. So this is a level of engagement with Indigenous communities and people in terms of employment and employing more Indigenous people. And unfortunately, the results were that 85% of a number of sectors, so this is cross-sector, are considered disengaged according to the survey. And only 28% were aware of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's Call to Action 92. So unfortunately, the majority of companies lack the motivation, competencies, and organizational readiness to effectively engage and partner. Now, I should mention this is mainstream non-Indigenous business that were surveyed. Certainly not Indigenous business, different kettle of fish. So those were the various stages of awareness, from being generally aware right up to partnership. And there were 3 gaps identified: commitment, capacity, and communication. And I should mention as well that even though companies, many of them rated low in terms of engagement, just the fact that they were engaged in the process of the survey and willing to provide honest feedback, I think was a good starting point for a lot of these businesses. So there you have a snapshot. So clearly the resource sector, with a longer history of working beside and with Indigenous communities, despite a lot of the issues and problems, were the most aware and engaged. The middle section, transportation, construction, and then the least engaged, hospitality, professional services, manufacturing, and retail. So you get a sense of how the various Canadian sectors engage. Be interesting to see where cannabis lies in that, if they were part of the survey. I guess they're higher up just from what I've heard today and the fact that they're here. So that just gives you the spread in terms of engagement. And I won't go through this in detail because I think we have to speed it up a little bit. Let's go back one. But I'll make this slide available to folks. In it, there's a lot of, ways that the mainstream private sector can engage with Indigenous communities in order to increase the number of opportunities for Indigenous employees. And I'll just leave you with a little bit of a story, just to give you a sense of how I view the opportunity. I had the privilege of spending I came down to Ottawa about a year ago, but before that I was in Dene country in the Northwest Territories, and I saw Regional Chief Yakalaya was here, and it was great to see him here. I got a chance to see most of the communities up and down the Mackenzie River. And I remember once in an airport, I met a young man who was working for the mines. And this young man got to talking, because you get to talking to a lot of people in the small airports waiting for planes and being weathered in. I asked him what he does, and he said he works for the mine, and it's a, I think, 2 weeks in, 1 week out schedule, right? And I said, how's that working out for you? And he said it's ideal. And here's why it was ideal. He's got a young family, he's got young children, his spouse works down in Fort Smith. He is able to go into the mine, work. His spouse finds that a bit difficult with taking care of the kids alone for that period, but then he's back in Fort Smith for a solid week. And during that week, he takes care of the kids, and he goes out on the land, right? And that's the important thing. He thought the most valuable thing about that job was being able to come home and go out on the land with his kids, right? And that type of job allows that to happen. So I think what we have to do when we engage Corporate Canada, we have to recognize and be creative about the opportunities we're creating. And I don't think it's a choice, either be in the community or get a job. I think we have to look for the win-wins. We have to look for that formula where people can stay in their communities, can thrive, can remain connected with their community's culture, language, and practices, and participate in the cash economy. So I'll leave it there. You can go to indigenousworks.ca. I promised Kelly Lindsay I'd make a plug. Under the Partnerships tab, you can see all the great work that Indigenous Works is doing there. Thank you very much. Miigwech, masicho.
Thanks, Mohand. We're going to try to keep things on time, so I've got a couple minutes for questions. Does anybody have questions? Okay, so we'll go right on to a little bit of housekeeping. So Eagle Law Group has some more draw winners, and is Fraser Heathen in the house? Fraser Heathen is the winner of a snagging blanket. Nicholson, is Naomi around? Guess what? You've got a snagging blanket as well. And they're right at the back at Eagle Law Group. And our third winner is Sean Wilton from Salvation Botanicals. Sean, are you here? Anyway, Sean is the lucky winner of 2 tickets to see the Calgary Flames and Winnipeg Jets tomorrow night. And again, the tickets are at Eagle Law. The blankets are at Eagle Law, right there. And so I'm going to call up our next panelists to get ready. And so basically, people have about 5-minute break. Stand up and stretch your legs, and then we're going to start again with I think Jeff Doctor is the moderator at 3 o'clock. Thanks.